Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Increase Your Billing with uLaw's WIP reports and more. Now, the webinar for today is not accredited for any CPD credits, but it's going to be a really interesting topic, the topic of revenue recognition and revenue realization, which are two very important topics for any business, leave alone legal businesses. And what we're hoping to showcase are some critical reports that we believe you as a user of the platform should acquaint yourself with and should be running these on a more regular basis to take advantage of the insight that we're able to provide you and take actionable items or next steps depending on your situation to both recognize and go one step further and realize the revenue, which is very critical from your overall business standpoint in terms of cash flow, P&L, and in some cases also managing the taxes, the jurisdictional taxes that are payable. For example, if you're from Ontario, then if you have a HST number, then it becomes very important that you're recovering these disbursement costs in an appropriate time period so that you can balance the HST that you've paid out as well. Okay, so we're definitely going to talk about what are these reports, especially the work in progress. How can you better understand what these reports are talking about? Why do they matter? And of course, look at some other complementary reports such as the work in progress disbursements, very critical, as well as invoice spending, invoice balance, and in some cases even timesheets, where uLaw as a platform is also able to go one step prior and give you some insights on dockets that are now ready to be built. Okay, so once again, today's webinar is not accredited for any CPD credits, but I will do my best to make this as informational and walk you through these specific key steps of how best you could utilize the platform to remind you of the steps you have to take to both recognize and realize your revenue. Okay? Please do use the chat window at all times to ask any questions that you may have. Both myself and my support staff will be happy to answer. And if you can, do mute your phone numbers or your laptops. And let's go. So what you see here is I've logged into my uLaw platform. I've logged into my fixtures legal practitioner, Roger Moore. It's a day-to-day activity within a legal office that's using the platform. Yeah. One of the dashboard items, if you have personalized it under settings, again, settings is where you can really personalize it, and one of the dashboard items is called Invoice Pending Matters. So even before we get into work in progress, even before we get into other aspects, you right away have a dashboard element right in your dashboard indicating to you that here are several matters, in fact marked in red, that indicate that over a month there are matters that have been with the status of invoice pending, which means you've put the docket in, you've also put the billable time in, but you've just not moved to the next stage of recognizing the revenue. Okay, so this is a starting point indicator of specific matters, but it does not tell you right away either the amount, how much of time have you spent, and doesn't give you the details behind it. So if I go into the separation matter, it goes right into the matter, and of course we leave this now to your discretionary powers to review the information. You can go into the question mark and right away understand what's happening. Or you could see there's an invoice pending because there's a second meeting. Maybe there's 1 hour of work to be done. And if it was 0 hours for a specific reason, you can just leave it at that and ignore it. That's why we say we leave it to your discretionary powers. But in this case, let's say it's $400 worth of effort that happened, in October or September. This is the immediate next step that you take after reviewing the matter. Okay, so you look at the dashboard, it tells you that there are specific matters, that need to be dealt with. And you can see the separation matter right now. It's moved further ahead because you've started to work on it. Ideally, the next step you would take is go ahead and generate the invoice. Okay? So this is one dashboard element that reminds you of the invoices that are due to be pending and request your attention to do the next rightful step. But leave alone that. So let's say we're actually in the progress or in the process of docketing across matters. So we have legal firms where you have 5, 6, 7 matters in a day. There may be multiple practitioners working towards contributing to the revenue, and they're all docketing their time away. And let's take an example of that. Let me go ahead and create a matter. So I'll create a client real quick. Okay. And I'll, for the purposes of today's demo, I'll just say it's a legal service. River Road in Ottawa. I'll mark that's the home address. Okay, so let's say we've done the client intake process. We've had Patricia Kendall as part of our client database. We, of course, go ahead, sign up the retainer agreement. Let's say we're going and creating a matter for Patricia. So let's go ahead and say, okay, we've got a matter. Maybe a family law matter. Okay, so let's say it's Patricia versus Stefan. And now, we highly recommend that you have a retainer agreement and do your best to retain through having money in the trust account through that initial retainer amount. So if that's the case, you would go ahead and take that retainer in. We'll skip that for now. We'll say, okay, let's say you've gone ahead and let's say this is started earlier. Earlier this week at about 10 a.m., it's an initial phone call, discussed the family matter, sent across the engagement letter. Let's say you spent almost 2 hours on it. So that's almost $800 worth of effort put in. So you have spent the effort, that's the duration, but just for purposes of the demo, we'd say you haven't yet billed the client, and that's why this particular tab exists. Let's say you've not yet billed this client. First and foremost, uLaw appreciates and understands this is 2 days back, so if it's at least even a day or older, when you come into the matter, it indicates to you in red that there is potential billability here, and you notice that the invoice spending has not yet kicked in because you've not yet put an effort in. So if a legal firm has such dockets where you've spent the duration or you've maybe planned for it, this could have also been at a later date where you've planned to spend 1 hour in court, so you probably wouldn't be able to bill till you get to that time. And that's where we have a timesheet that indicates to you the planned hours and the billed hours. Okay, that's the first step. So the first step in recognizing the revenue is first understanding all the dockets that you have not yet billed. First step. So for which we recommend that you generate a timesheet. And this is a timesheet based on the calendar. But we're going to look at different dates. And if you look at the 17th of November, you have initial phone call. And these columns are the estimated hours and the billable hours. So this estimated hours has two meanings to it. One is that you put the effort in and not yet billed them, or maybe this is work in the future that you planned for, and time hasn't come yet for you to recognize that and bill the customer. Okay? But this clearly being the 17th of November, 10 a.m. was in the past, and noticing that this is in a 0 billable time is an indication that you can go ahead and bill this client. So you generate this timesheet. We give you the actual file number as well, so you can tag it. You can easily use the quick view to search for it, get to it, and do the first immediate logical next step, which is billing the client for it. So now you've said, all right, yeah, I missed it. Here's the 2 hours worth of effort that I need to bill. Immediately after you say that, yes, I'm going to bill this client and enter the billable time, uLaw picks up the fact that, okay, the next logical step is to recognize the revenue, which is making sure that you're able to confirm in writing that this money is yours, and hence you have to generate an invoice, which is a agreed upon legal document that you can send your client as a way of indicating to them the work put in and the money that's being asked. Now, let's say there are several such matters, just like this one. You have other matters where you have effort put in and a billable time put in. We have a report, and I'll come to the context of today's webinar, under Quick View, under Document Generation, and here are the 3 reports that we were talking about in today's webinar. First is the work in progress. And let's say I'm doing this for a monthly. We recommend doing this on a weekly basis, but it really comes down to the traffic and the amount of work that you have in your legal firm. And you notice a few numbers here. You can see there are some other matters, such as Jonathan, Gregory, where there's some unbilled hours. And you also have our Patricio Stefan matter. And you can see there's 2 hours of unbilled hours. So not only does this report tell you that these are invoice pending matters, it also tells you from what angle is this invoice pending. Is it billable time, flat fee, or a combination of both? Purely from time, effort put in. Okay, so this is one report. Let's say I go in that same matter, and let's say I had another event. Call this document drafting. Let's say you spent an hour on it, or let's say 18 minutes, but you're charging $300. Let's say maybe that's what's agreed upon. So now you have a combination of effort or time put in, both in the form of billable time as well as a flat rate docket. So 2 different dockets, yeah? One on the 17th, one on the 19th. I can even change this to 18th. As you can see, you can always backdate this within uLaw. Now let me run that same report again. So quick view, document generation, work in progress, and I'll call it for this month. I could have done it for the week, but I'm just going to draw it for the entire month. Now, if you notice, that same report brings up Patricia and Stefan as 2 hours of unbilled and $300 worth of flat fee. And is there any money in trust? No, because you don't have a retainer in this matter. So this is very critical as a first step to understand and appreciate all the matters that you have where you've put the effort in, you've not yet generated an invoice, and you have the revenue or a revenue obligation to now move to the next step of generating an invoice. So let's say I go ahead and add one more element to this. So you have a billable time, you have a flat rate. Now let's say there is a disbursement involved in this. And this is very critical, and we've done several webinars in the past where we highlight and really talk about the importance of staying on top of these disbursements. The the advantages that you have if you have a trust amount sitting in your retainer account, because then you can recover that money faster and not wait for it, and the importance of recovering these disbursements in a timely manner, both from a P&L but also from a jurisdictional tax perspective. So let me go ahead and say, all right, there was a fee involved. I'll say maybe there's a certification fee. Finance coming out of my RBC account, and let's say I wrote them a check. This is a general disbursement. Okay, so there's 1,343 worth of effort, combination of billable time, flat rate, and disbursements. So if I were to go back to the dashboard, this is of course just going to highlight there's an invoice pending matter, whereas the work in progress report is going to highlight the actual subdivision across matters, across the billable time and the flat rate dockets that are happening. But the one thing you notice is that this report was not meant to highlight the disbursement component of it. And hence, we have a supplementary report called the WIP disbursement. And the reason why it's a separate report is many times across legal cases, you have situations where disbursements may be a big component of the initial revenue aspect, because you may be spending a lot of disbursements or expending it ahead of time before even a docket. So this becomes easier for someone to generate. And now if I were to generate the work in progress disbursement, you see that Patricia with Stefan, we clearly state that there's a $100 disbursement, again no trust balance, and this is something that you should look towards recognizing. So these two reports should give you a clear picture of all the outstanding dockets or work in progress, revenue recognized ready dockets, and work in progress disbursements or revenue recognizable readiness for the disbursements. Okay, so this is really a big component of what we wanted to drive home. And this is critical because there could be certain disbursements with tax, there could be certain disbursements without tax, and you may have paid these taxes, and if you're not recovering these disbursements in time, and what happens is it just becomes harder. Then you owe the government a certain amount of money, right? Because you're unable to balance out what you paid and what you received. And hence it's very critical that you're recovering these disbursements and running these work in progress expenses as well as work in progress docketing reports on a regular basis, and we recommend at least doing it on a weekly basis. But again, it comes down to the traffic, as I mentioned, the amount of files that you manage in a time period. Now what happens if I go ahead and do the next logical step? I'm ready to invoice this client. I'll say invoice. I can always do a pre-bill. And in the pre-bill or in the billing stage, we've introduced this new feature that allows you to encompass all the dockets and disbursements that have not yet been invoiced as part of any invoicing cycle before, right? Or, as I mentioned before, if your legal firm or if that particular matter demands that there are a lot of disbursements and there's the readiness for invoicing dockets and disbursements are not there, and it's only the disbursements that need to be reflected in those early stage invoices, then you can just choose the disbursements only. And if I were to do a quick preview with disbursements only as the option, you're going to notice the certification fee is the only thing that we pick up in this particular invoice cycle. Okay? So that's very important for you to appreciate, that you now have the flexibility of invoicing the client based on the agreed upon engagement letter or the situation. So you can do dockets and disbursements, dockets only, disbursements only, which is a very powerful tool. You can do dockets and disbursements. You look at the billable time. And you can look at the flat rate combining, and let's say we do have the tax component to it of 13% in Ontario. Then you have the $100 certification fee, and that's the amount that the client owes. Again, this is a pre-bill. Maybe your front office generates this, sends it to you for your review. Or if you're a one-person shop, then you do this yourself. Ensure that it's all right, and then move into the complete stage of the invoicing. We click complete, and you click on the invoice button. And the big difference between an actual invoice that I'm going to be generating now and the pre-bill is, of course, you have a watermark called preview, but more importantly, the previews do not generate an invoice number, okay, or a pre-bill, as it's sometimes called. Now here is an actual invoice for that matter for Patricia 3388 for the amount of $1,343. Now if I run that WIP report, as you should expect, you see that first and foremost, if I go into my dashboard, I should see this Patricia Assistive Fund disappear. So you've done well there at a very high level. But if you want to get granular, we recommend doing the work in progress monthly or weekly. And here was the previous report that we ran. And here is the report now. And you can see that particular matter for which you have generated the invoice has left the work in progress stage. So let's say there's a workflow, pre-bill, you bill, it's in work in progress. After you build it and invoiced it, it moves outside the work in progress phase. Where does this go into? It goes to the next phase called the invoice balance report. The invoice pending are all the matters for which you have not yet generated an invoice. So this is one step further. And you can see clearly we don't have our Patricia in this particular report. But the invoice pending showcases all those matters. So if you look at the Gregory and Brown, you can see that there's $1,000 worth of trust deposit. There's $400 withdrawal. There's $600 balance, and there's a $452 worth of billable hour that's just sitting there for you to invoice and move next. So you've got the work in progress that indicates all the dockets, disbursements that have to be invoiced. There's an invoice pending that are all the invoices across the firm over a time period that needs to be generated. Once you have generated, it moves into the next phase, which is then available as part of what's called as an invoice balance. So that's right under accounts, under other. So you can generate that same report based on a matter. And do this over a date range. And this allows us to divide each matter in that particular time period. Okay. If you clearly notice, the last one, Patricia Wasistefan, total invoice is $1,343, and the balance owed is $1,343. So this is the next stage that now uLaw is talking about, the revenue realization. So we've done well to do the revenue recognition, docket, invoice, done. Next is to make that money yours. So yes, you've generated an invoice and sent it to the client, but unless they've paid you, if cash is king, you need the cash in hand, and hence now you're waiting for that revenue to be realized, and hence now you either calling the client or sending them email notifications or text messages to ensure that they make that payment. Interestingly enough, if you notice any of our invoices, and if you have integrated uLaw with any of the payment gateways that we work with, right under settings, and it's a free of charge setting. We don't charge you for this, but this is part of the revenue realization as well. We work with the likes of Pivotal or Newway, Nearest, TD, Global Pay, and very recently we started working with LawPay, which is a big company that does a lot of payment gateway processing for legal firms across North America. In fact, we're having a webinar in our coming week. I want to say in a couple of weeks we have a webinar that talks about integrating payments with Newway, which is one of the payment gateways we integrate with. Okay. And what this does is when you have that particular invoice, you can send this PDF document via email right to your client, and they can click this link and pay that exact amount with the reference number. You get notified once it's paid, right? They can put and pay this just like how they would do it on Amazon or any of the modern e-commerce platforms that they're used to paying for otherwise. So this facilitates an increase in the time of revenue realization. Okay? So let's say they made that payment. You get notified that that payment has been made, and all you have to do is notify uLaw that that payment has been made. Okay? So you can just say action, accept client payment, or you can use our question mark, which tells you clearly how much the client owes you. There are multiple ways of doing this. Tell us the amount. If they paid less, and maybe you write them a discount check. Let's say this is through a credit card. You will be sent the authorization number telling us, when you set up that payment gateway, you will set up payments to be directed to a particular bank account, and that you indicate which bank account it is. Importantly, give your client that receipt. And hit apply. So you've gone through a full life cycle of realizing revenue. And you can, of course, send this payment receipt to your client. You can put your own logo, banner, it could be colored. And if I go back into my accounts, invoice balance by matter, you would notice, of course, like how you would expect, you had an invoice of $1,343, it was paid, there's an invoice balance of 0. Compared to the previous state that it was in, where it says total invoice, total paid was 0, and the balance owed was $1,343. The minute you accepted the payment, it's left that state and it's moved into total paid. And you would see this right across all forms of analytics, all forms of data. If I go into Patricia Kendall and look at the client fee book, clearly see that was the revenue recognized or realized from this client. Now, this was the invoice balance report across all matters. Okay, and this was generated before I accepted that payment, so hence it shows that. But this report is the fourth and the final report that I want to highlight. And this is slightly different from the invoice balance report by matter. So this shows you all the matters, the amount invoiced, paid, does not necessarily highlight any pending trust transfers. Whereas the full-fledged invoice balance report has a particular column called pending trust transfer. Now, there's two forms of revenue realization in a legal firm. Let's say you have invoice, but you had a trust retainer amount sitting in your pool trust account. Now, once you've generated that invoice, it's now your obligation to move that money from trust to general. So let's look at that example as the final example of how some legal firms sometimes don't realize the revenue. They've done the right steps, docketed, dispersed, invoiced as well, but then the last stage of realization is missed. So if we look at Daniel Craigson's client, you have $621.50. There's a $1,000 initial trust payment, but there's $621.50 sitting in pending trust transfer. So you go straight into the quick view, type in Craigson, and there is the writing of the will. Click on it. Clearly tells you pending trust transfer. You click on the transfer button, because this is the one step that you probably should have done right away, but you haven't done it, and hence this facilitates for you to do it. Of course, you have to do this in real life. You have to open up your online bank account, or you may have to go to the bank, right? You can actually go into the matter, click the question mark, or you can just write from here. You choose the amount. Maybe you did it in real life, but did not notify uLaw that you've done it, in which case you can backdate that work that you just did. Say, yes, on the 15th, I forgot to tell you, uLaw, I'm so sorry, but I moved my money from trust into my RBC account, and this was done through my online. If you don't have a reference number, you can put the date in. So much for my typing skills. And you hit transfer. Of course, we help you move along to the next phase of this, which is downloading the Form 9A, because we know you're in Ontario and you've done an EFT. Okay? Now, if I were to go back to run that same report, again, just like what you should expect. And here's the electronic Form 9A. Okay. So right through, as we wait for that report to download, so I can show you that you've got that off the checklist. So just as a quick recap, right? So you're a legal firm, you're really working your day-to-day, grinding it, and you're meeting different clients. Sometimes you forget to docket, so we have the right tools to help capture this. So you can download the uLaw app on your phone and just simply docket or capture the time dockets. Or if you're writing this down on a piece of paper on a daily basis, you can always come back into our calendaring system, use the scratch pad, and just update this right across your clock it, and then at the end of the day you can just tell us which particular matter it belongs to. So you can just tell us what you did, and at the end of the day you can match it to who you did it to, which matter for that matter. So you can use the scratch pad for daily dockets. You can go to the actual calendar and you can just click on a date and tell us that you had a court visit. Okay, and attach it to a matter. For that same Daniel Craigson matter, writing of will, you could say I spent 12 minutes. So we now facilitate you to do the right first step of docketing. If you've not yet docket, and if you've just planned for it, we give you the timesheets that indicate that you have to docket. Once you've docketed, we now have both the invoice spending matter as well as the work in progress report to tell you that you need to move to the next phase of recognizing this docket, which is in the form of generating an invoice. And you can see that our friend is no more in this list because we just completely docketing for Daniel Craigson. Okay. So once again, I repeat, it's under Quick View, under Document Generation, Work in Progress, showcases both in billable time as well as flat rate dockets, all the outstanding dockets that need to be part of an invoice. So if you notice the Daniel Craigson work that we just put in, and the trust balance left. We also similarly have a work in progress disbursement, which specifically captures all the disbursements that you have paid for or have reflected. This is great. This report is fantastic because it tells that you pretty much recovered all your disbursements, which is fantastic, right? Otherwise, you would have a report that indicates all of the disbursements that you've documented, but you've not yet recognized or has not yet become part of an invoice. Then you do the next step, you go into the specific matter, generate that invoice, and that's the work in progress work is complete. And then the last set of documents are your invoice pending, which are all the outstanding invoices. And once you've generated the invoice, then you have two documents to look at. The invoice balance, which gives you any pending trust transfers. That's under other invoice balance and invoice balance by matter. And those are these two reports right here. So this is your invoice balance across time. So you can see John Bell, the last activity date was 2016, which is not good. But here's all the pending trust transfers. And we've worked with a few clients of ours who've earned when they migrated over. And once we have all the data in, we've actually helped them earn or realize over 5 to 6 grand of worth of money because they had all that money sitting in their trust when they should have moved it to their general. If you look at this report and just summarize this, you got almost, well, that's ridiculous, but $84,000 worth of money that's sitting in your money to be the bank to be realized. Okay. I'm going to now open up the floor for any questions that you may have pertaining to today's webinar, with the real focus being on why look at our important reports such as work in progress and work in progress disbursements, invoice pending, invoice balance as the top 4 reports that allow you to move your dockets and both recognize and realize revenue for your firm. Okay. As always, this webinar is being recorded, will be available in our YouTube channel, uLawPractice. It's not been accredited for any CPD credits, but we do have a 1 hour of professionalism CPD credit in our next week's webinar, which is how do you ensure a high index of BX, CX, UX, and PX for your legal office, and this is for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. And as I mentioned earlier, we then have an interesting presentation of how uLaw, combining with New Way, one of the payment gateways that we integrate with, can facilitate faster revenue realization. So once you've generated the invoice, how can you facilitate, make it very subtle and convenient for your clients to make that payment, provided you didn't have a retainer to begin with. Okay, so thank you once again for joining today's webinar. As promised in my previous webinars, if it's not a CPD and if it really isn't necessary, we don't want to use up the whole 1 hour. We want to make it crisp I guess we're all moving towards that trend of bite-sized information. And so definitely thank you for your time, and I will open the floor for any questions that you may have. So please do use the chat window to ask any questions, and to use any of our social handles, whether that's Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, to give us your feedback on what we can do better with our webinars, any topics that we can cover, any new CPD sessions that you want us to talk about. We'll be more than happy to facilitate that as well. No, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And also, again, this is a disclaimer. It's a quote-unquote promotional message, but one of our partners, LawPay, is offering all of our uLaw clients a promotional offer with their payment gateway. So if you are in the hunt for a payment gateway solution, please do reach out to us, and we'll be happy to put you to the right contact at LawPay. As I mentioned before, we do have several partners who facilitate payment gateways. It comes down to pricing, it comes down to the interest rate that they charge you for these transactions. So LawPay is offering a promotional discount. I think it's a no monthly fee for a whole year, which is that's pretty good. That's up to 2023. So to take full advantage, to explore how it may have come to help. Can the timesheet highlight the ones that are not yet billed? Okay, I think that's a good question. In fact, one of the features that we're looking to implement, which hopefully will be there in the next month or so, if you look at our calendar, right, click on this little arrow, and if you can generate a timesheet, and I may have showed this to you earlier as well. No harm in repeating myself here. So when you generate a timesheet for a certain time period, what uLaw does is it pretty much captures all the time and effort that are both planned or estimated, and captures the time that you've billed. Where does this come from? It comes from the actual docket. We go and look at each and every matter. We look at the duration, and we look at the billable time. Okay? And then we give you this report that says, here are all the dockets across matters. So this was JF, and this is SM, different matters. The work that you put in, the time that you have spent or have planned for, and the time that you billed. Now, there could be some valid reasons why you're not billing. Maybe you're capturing the effort in a T&M. Maybe your overall engagement was a flat fee, and hence you're not charging by the docket. So that could possibly be the case. But that's in your discretion. What we're looking to highlight are the examples of the dockets where you've planned or you've estimated a certain time that does not reflect the billable time. We at least want to bring this to your attention. What we're hoping to do is mark them in red so that your eye goes only to the ones that are zeros. The ones most others remain to be in black. But that's something we're certainly looking to do. So if you look at Daniel Craigson, we've planned for 12 minutes, but we've not yet billed. Same thing with Gregory Brown. So ideally you would go in, choose Gregory Brown, and really understand, oh yes, on the 17th you had a 12-minute meeting, but you failed to yet put the docket. Go in and add the 12 minutes. And this kicks off the next cycle, which is the revenue recognition, which is making it part of an invoice and then receiving the money. Or in this case, you can just simply do the trust transfer. So hopefully that explained that. But that's a good point. We are hoping to bring this in red. It's readily available to you and easily understandable. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, thank you very much for your time, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar next Friday at 2 p.m. Thank you. Have a great weekend, and ciao.